Hey guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and today we're going to discuss my top 5 biggest Space Marine winners from the new Arcs of Omen points changes and rules changes. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And firstly, I'm going to talk about the Primaris characters. So I was really happy to see that the triumvirate of the Primaris characters, the ones that I've been always using, or in case of the Lieutenant, always wanted to use one, have decreased in their points cost very significantly. So regular Space Marine Captain has dropped 10 points, but the accessories, all the war gear, has become free. So now a Captain with a Relic Shield and a Mastercrafted Power Sword and a Heavy Bolt Pistol costs 25 points less than he did before, meaning 80 points, which is extremely cheap for Primaris character. Obviously, as we've discussed multiple times on this channel, a Captain is a must-have character unless you have a better named alternative like Helbrecht or Edric Agaton or a bunch of other named characters that Space Marines have. But if you're playing vanilla chapters and you don't have a named alternative, or your named alternative is just not as good, the Primaris Captain with a Relic Shield and a Mastercrafted Power Sword is the best way to go. Having that 2+ save in the non-Armor of Contempt era is very important, and 4+ Feel No Pain against Mortals is also great because armies like Thousand Suns, Tyranids, Grey Knights are still very strong and will be present in the meta, and they can dish out a bunch of mortal wounds in a phase, and you don't want to lose your most important character. Next is my favorite Primaris Lieutenant with a Storm Shield. This, I don't know why, but this model was always my favorite, probably because it came with the almighty Indomitus box, and I always wanted a Primaris Lieutenant to have a good melee weapon and an invulnerable save, and this model combines these two things together. But that guy always had two problems. Firstly, he did cost 90 points, which was relatively expensive for such a model. Not terribly expensive, but you usually didn't have points for him, especially if you wanted to have a captain, and you almost always want to have a captain. And secondly, we didn't have the slot for him because we only had access to usually 3 HQ slots unless you were running multiple patrols, which was too expensive. So we only could take 3 characters, and Lieutenant was not usually in the most important list. But now when we have access to the 4th slot, I really don't know if there is anything that is more valuable to you than having that reroll once to wound for your core units, especially when this guy costs 65 points. That's just incredibly cheap. It's a wonderful price for a model that does so many things for you and also is, well, pretty good in combat with 5 attacks with that Mastercrafted Power Sword, and is relatively survivable with a 4+ invulnerable save and a 2+ save. So if you can take this guy, I definitely recommend him, especially if your army, your list that you like to play has dropped, say, that same 65 points. He is a perfect thing to fit into your new post-Armor of Contempt list. Same goes for Librarian. He's 10 points cheaper now, and his Chief Librarian upgrade is 5 points cheaper. So in total, we've dropped 15 points on him. And with the lack of Armor of Contempt, the Psychic Fortress is back to being a must-have for most Space Marine lists. Because if before we at least had a 6+ save against AP4 Malta-esque weapons that shot our dreadnoughts, our vehicles, whatever, our units, now you don't have that save at all. And the same goes for AP3, which will now put you back on your 6+, which is not great at all. So you definitely need that Psychic Fortress, so I would recommend to always bring a Librarian unless you have an alternative. And by an alternative, I mean an alternative source where you can get the 5+ invulnerable save, say the Uphold the Honor of the Emperor Oath for Black Templars. Next are the Terminators with hammers and shields. I'm glad these guys are back because I missed them, even though I do like the dual Lightning Claws Terminators, but I didn't appreciate the fact that these hammer and shield guys, which are, in my opinion, a very, very unique staple for TK, and they should be present in the game. They were kind of left out and forgotten, but now we will use them again because they've dropped a solid 10 points each to 33 points now, the same price that the dual Lightning Claw Terminators had before. And you still get the 4-up invulnerable save and the 1-up save that we used to have on the regular non-Storm Shield Terminators with Armor of Contempt. Now we don't have that, but these guys still get the +1 save, so we really want to use them. And the fact that Armor of Contempt is not going to mess with our AP2 on the Thunderhammers is also great, because it was so terrible to have that AP1 on the hammers against anything that had Armor of Contempt, and now it's not a problem anymore. Unless you're playing against Votan, but I can help you with that. With War Gear being free or almost free across the board, chapters that can mix and match the Terminator's types, like the Space Wolves with their Wolfguard Terminators that can do some crazy things like a Lightning Claw and Storm Shield Terminators and all that stuff. Deathwatch, which can bring the Terminators as a part of a kill team and can mix and match Assault version and the regular Terminator version, and the Dark Angels with their Terminator squads. All these chapters are now very much in the luck and can use Terminators to their fullest. So definitely bringing an MSU squad of Hammer and Shield Terminators to the game is back to being a very good way to spend 165 points. Next is a rather unusual thing which I actually did not expect to appear in such a video, but here we are. As I always like to say, Warhammer is a very fluent game, and that's why you should always collect the stuff that you really like, because just a few months from now, that stuff might be the best thing ever in the meta. I'm not sure that aggressors are going to be just that, but they are certainly not bad now. For 30 points each, and yes, I did not misspoke, they now cost just 30 points. They've dropped something like, I think, 10 and 15 points each, which is crazy. So yeah, the Flamer version was previously 40 points and the Boltstorm Gauntlet version was 45, so each version now is basically the same price, so you would probably go with the Boltstorm one, and that one is just 30 points. And what you get for the price is a whole bunch of high volume firepower, which is a rare thing nowadays in Space Marine lists and can be very good in certain conditions, especially now that we can stay in the tactical doctrine for longer than we could before. And we also get high volume of AP3 damage to melee, which, yes, I do understand the limitation of damage 2 against -1 damage targets. However, there are quite a lot of things in the game which are not -1 damage, and damage 2 against those would be very, very good. Say against Necrons, the damage 2 is very good against their Lich Guard, Scarabs, and all that stuff. Their problem now is, as always, the lack of survivability, which is only aided by the Transhuman, which is only wounded on 4s or better stratagem, unyielding in the face of the foe, which is a +1 save against damage 1 attacks, whether melee or shooting doesn't matter, and that one only costs 1 CP no matter what is the size of the squad, and the almighty Psychic Fortress, which is very helpful for these guys now. Obviously, if you're playing chapters like Black Templars, you have access to 5+ invulnerable save and the Baby Transhuman, which would help them tremendously. That's why they are part of my top 3 units, which are good with Black Templars. Same with Deathwatch, they get the 5-up invulnerable Dominus Aegis relic aura, so yeah, that one as well. And the Azrael with Dark Angels would all obviously help these guys a lot with the 4+ invulnerable save from his Lion Helm. And if for some reason you are running Iron Father Ferrous, obviously his 5-up invulnerable aura for infantry is also helpful here as well, especially considering that now he's cheaper than he was before. But even without an invulnerable save, they are still not bad because they are very cheap and still have quite a lot of wounds and that toughness 5, which helps them survive quite a lot. They are not a death ball of Chaos Space Marine Terminators and should not be treated as such. Another very important point that changed about aggressors is that the strategic reserves are now free, so you can put them in the strategic reserves to arrive at the later turn, and that can really help, firstly, their mobility, because their move is only 5, so you cannot really hope to traverse a lot of ground with them. And also their survivability, because you'll be able to stay off the board, out of harm's reach, and then on the second turn arrive from the edge, shoot your bolters, and possibly even charge, especially if you have a chaplain nearby with Canticles of Hate or possibly your Blood Angels, and you just have +1 to charge always. So yes, aggressors, very good. You can run them in squads of 3 if you just want some extra firepower support and maybe a distraction. But I would recommend to have them in a squad of 5 to maximize the use of Transhuman and their firepower as well. The almighty Plasma Inceptors get their return in the 9th edition, probably at the end of the edition, and now they cost just 40 points each, which is very cheap, and their AP3 Plasma damage 2 is now as great as always, with the no Armor of Contempt to protect the targets that you actually really want to shoot with it, like say other Space Marines. So very good unit, fast. You don't have to pay the troop stacks nowadays, so you get more points, so you can actually fit more of these guys in. HQs are also cheaper, so you can afford that captain to help out with rerolls with these guys. So yes, a very good time to run Plasma Inceptors. You can start them not on the board in Dip Strike and protect them from first turn firepower if you're playing against a shooting heavy army and you don't have a bunch of terrain to hide them. I would probably recommend to at least try to hide them to get some use of them in the first turn, but that's up to you, up to your terrain setup and the opponent you're playing against. Don't quote me on this unless you really are sure that this is the way to go. Their survivability isn't perfect and probably is their biggest weakness, but the fact that you can start them off the board means that you will at least get 1 turn of shooting out of them, which isn't bad. And the last one is the Infiltrators. I would say that the heavy intercessors are also in this category, but I just wanted to focus my attention on the Infiltrators because I really, really like them. So those troops are not mandatory now. Obviously, with new Arcs of Omen detachment, you still need some OPSEC for the secondaries and objective holding. And as I predicted, some of the secondaries incorporate a special clause that can only be fulfilled by the troops units with OPSEC, which is why you still need some in your lists. Plus, you also get some useful expendable units to hold objectives and stuff like that. Infiltrators are now 20 points, same as the regular intercessors were before, and the Helix Gauntlet upgrade is free now. This upgrade allows you to ignore the first damage that comes into your unit. So say you have failed a save, that first save in this phase will be ignored. You can only use that once per turn, but it's still very good, especially considering that they will probably only be shot at or only charged, unlikely to be both, at least from my experience. But they also have 2 other very important things about them. They have concealed position rules, which allows you to forward deploy, so you can deploy anywhere on the board, not in the enemy deployment zone, which is very helpful. And they also have a scrambler rule, which allows you to prevent deep strikes from within 12 inches of them. Again, helpful. Deep strikes are not as popular nowadays, but against some armies like Jinsteel Occults and Thousand Suns, sometimes Grey Knights, that can be game-changing to be able to zone off that deep strike. Having just 1 squad of these guys is relatively cheap, will probably not affect your army composition that much, but you will get a lot of tactical flexibility out of that. A loss of Armor of Contempt is going to hurt them, obviously, but for the price, they are rather cheap, pretty expendable, so I can say that I cannot say that they were really harmed by that Armor of Contempt. They were not really survivable in any case, and they are there to fulfill a task and probably die next turn. So if you use them like that, they're still very, very good. So that's it, guys. Let me know if I've missed some units that are even bigger winners than these 5. That's quite possible, and I would love to hear your opinion on that. And I'll see you next time.